The man in seat 14, plane smelled like recycled air and faint coffee. Sundar Pichai sat quietly in seat 14C, a narrow spot beside the aisle. He wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, blending into the row of tired faces and business travelers. His head tilted back against the seat, eyes closed, but not asleep. He never really slept before flights. Too many thoughts always came in those silent moments, memories of home, of struggle of the long road from Chennai to Silicon Valley. And now his phone buzzed in his pocket, a quick glance. A short, polite message from the Google team. Your keynote speech has the highest anticipated views this quarter. Safe flight, sir. He smiled. Not because of the praise, but because somewhere deep inside, he remembered the young boy who once couldn't afford a backpack, who had to borrow books, who shared a small room with his entire family and studied by the dim light of a street lamp. The flight was a long one, 11 hours to Washington, where he would speak about the future of technology, ethics in AI, and accessibility for developing nations. These were subjects he believed in deeply. But first, he had to survive this flight. The woman beside him in seat 14B was already shifting uncomfortably. She was in her 50s, her makeup thick, hair tied tightly back. Her bag, a large designer tote, took up more than its share of space. She glanced at Sundar, then again, longer this time. Her lips pursed. He noticed it, but said nothing. This wasn't new. He had faced this kind of quiet suspicion many times. People who couldn't see past his brown skin and accent. Even now, even after everything, the woman leaned toward the flight attendant. A young man with tired eyes and a badge that read, Liam. Excuse me, she whispered, though loud enough for Sundar to hear. I'm not comfortable next to him. Is there another seat? Liam blinked, confused. Is there a problem, ma'am? He was looking at his phone and muttering something. I don't feel safe. Sundar turned his head slowly. His voice was calm. I was just reading an article. Is everything all right? The woman stiffened. She looked at him as if she hadn't expected him to speak English. Or maybe she just didn't expect him to speak so clearly, so politely. You see, she said to Liam. He's watching me now. Liam looked from Sundar to the woman and back. He cleared his throat. Sir, would you mind just for a moment? Could I see your boarding pass? Sundar handed it over without hesitation. Liam studied it, his face suddenly shifting. The name printed neatly on the ticket read, Sundar Pichai. Liam blinked again, recognition dawning. He looked up, back down, then whispered, Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I'll take care of this right away. But Sundar held up a hand. Please, don't. No need for embarrassment. Just let it go. Liam hesitated, then gave a small nod. Of course. The woman frowned. So, you're not going to move him? Liam's posture straightened. No, ma'am. I am not. The woman's face turned red, then pale. She gripped the armrest and looked forward, jaw clenched. Sundar returned to his article. Not to prove anything, but because this was how he responded to hatred by continuing forward, by not letting it take root, but deep inside, something cracked. Not from the insult itself, he had heard worse, but from the exhaustion of it all. How many more times would he have to shrink himself to make others feel comfortable? How many more times would he have to forgive this kind of fear? The plane began to taxi, and as it did, Sundar looked out the small window. The sky was dim, the clouds heavy. He thought of his mother, how she used to wait at the gate of their small flat in India, watching the planes overhead and whispering, one day you'll be up there. He was, but the world up there still wasn't fair. Just as the plane lifted off, a small boy 2 rows ahead dropped his toy. A cheap plastic car that skidded under Sundar's seat. Without a word, he bent down, picked it up, and handed it to the child with a smile. The boy's mother mouthed, thank you. And for a moment, that kindness softened something. But just then, the woman beside him whispered, low but bitter, I still don't think you belong in this seat. Sundar looked at her. Not angry, just tired. Neither did I, he said softly. Not until I worked for it. She didn't reply. And then, from 3 rows behind, a man leaned forward. Tall, wearing a suit. He had been watching everything. "Excuse me," the man said loudly enough for the row to hear. "Are you Sundar Pichai?" "The CEO of Google?" Sundar hesitated. Slowly nodded. The man grinned. "Well, that explains it. I was just watching your TED Talk last week. Brilliant stuff, especially the part about how technology can bring clean water to remote areas. Thank you for what you do." The woman's mouth opened. She looked from the man to Sundar, then down at her lap. She didn't speak again, but the damage had already settled in Sundar's chest. Not because of her words, but because they were still so common, still so accepted in moments when people think no one important is watching. He had once believed success would shield him from this. But now he saw the truth. No title, no wealth, no fame could protect someone from being misjudged by their skin. And yet, even with that weight pressing down, he smiled because kindness had answered cruelty, because a child's smile had broken through the coldness of suspicion. Because somewhere in the world, another boy like him was studying in a small room, dreaming of doing something big, and maybe, just maybe, stories like this one could help him believe that dreams were still worth chasing. Asterisk. The story behind the silence that plane had been in the air for less than an hour. But for Sundar, time was already stretching into something heavier. He sat quietly, hands folded, looking straight ahead. The woman beside him had turned slightly away, pretending to sleep, though her body was too tense to be resting. Her shoulders remained stiff, her jaw locked, and every few minutes, her eyes would open just slightly, stealing sideways glances at him. Sundar didn't react. His calm was not passive. It was earned. It came from years of learning when to speak, when to wait, and when to let the silence do the talking. He thought of his father again. His father, Raghunatha Pichai, was a quiet man. He worked long hours as an electrical engineer in India and came home each night covered in dust and sweat. He never raised his voice, never complained. But once, Sundar remembered, he had stood in line at a government office for 5 hours just to fill out a form, so his son could attend a better school. When young Sundar had asked him why he waited so long, his father had smiled and said, "Sometimes standing still is the only way to move forward." The memory filled Sundar's chest with a strange mix of warmth and ache. Outside the plane window, the sky was still pale and blue. The clouds floated like quiet islands, untouched by what was happening inside the cabin. A soft ding rang out, and the seatbelt sign switched off. A few passengers stood to stretch. Sundar remained seated. He pulled a small notebook from his bag, one he still used to sketch ideas, even though everything else had gone digital. The pages were filled with rough thoughts, diagrams, quotes, reminders about human-centered design. He scribbled a note about bias in machine learning, but his hand paused halfway through. The irony hit hard. Even machines were learning from the worst of us. He closed the notebook. From across the aisle, an elderly woman leaned forward and caught his eye. She looked kind. Her hair was silver, her hands thin, shaking just slightly. "I'm sorry about earlier," she said, not loudly, but clearly. Sundar blinked. "You don't have to apologize, ma'am. You didn't do anything." She nodded, eyes steady. But I was quiet. And sometimes silence can feel like agreement. He didn't expect that. "Not here. Not now." His reply was soft. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They exchanged a small smile. And with that, something in the air shifted. Just a little. But the peace didn't last. The woman in 14B finally stirred. She sat upright, adjusted her scarf, and looked around nervously. Her fingers tapped against her phone. She opened a notes app, typed something, then deleted it. Again and again. Sundar watched out of the corner of his eye. He wasn't judging. He was simply observing like he always did. Her discomfort wasn't just about him anymore. It was about being seen. Being exposed. The fear that maybe she wasn't the person she thought she was. Suddenly, she turned to him. "What do you want?" "From me?" she asked, her voice sharp. barely above a whisper. He looked at her, surprised. I don't want anything. Then why are you just sitting there, acting like you're better than everyone? He let out a slow breath. I'm not. I'm just sitting. Her lips tightened. You made me look foolish. I didn't say anything, he said gently. Your own words did that. Asterisk, she looked away, cheeks burning. He could have left it there. He had every reason to. But something in him refused to walk away from the harder path. You know, he added after a moment, when I was a child, I couldn't afford a plane ticket, not even a short one. And now I fly for work almost every week. I've sat beside people from every country, every faith, every story. Most treat me with respect. Some don't, but I've learned something from all of them. She didn't speak, God, he continued. What I've learned is people don't change from being punished. They change when they're seen. Really? Seen. When someone gives them the chance to choose who they want to be. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast, fighting the tears. And then the unexpected happened. Asterisk. Her voice cracked. I've never been called out before. Not like that. I don't know what came over me. Fear? Maybe, Sundar said. It comes in many shapes. She nodded slowly. He let the silence settle again. Not the kind that felt cold or cruel, but the kind that left room for thought. For healing got as the flight attendants passed through with drinks. The elderly woman across the aisle asked for hot tea. The mother with the young boy asked for an extra napkin to wipe sticky fingers. The world moved forward, unaware of the small, heavy moment that had just passed in seat. 14B. But Sundar was aware. And the woman beside him was now visibly changed. Not fully, not suddenly, but something in her had cracked open. A few minutes later, she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim novel. She didn't read it, just held it. Like you gave her something to hold on to. And then, softly, almost too quietly, she whispered, Thank you for not yelling at me. Sundar looked at her. Anger can't change hearts, but conversation might. She nodded. As they flew through layers of cloud. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, preparing for the long haul ahead. Sundar closed his eyes again, but this time, there was a different kind of quiet inside him. Not the silence of pain, but of release. Not everything had been fixed. Not everything had been solved. But a seed had been planted, and that he knew is how forest began. But then, from the back of the plane, a loud voice rose. Angry, urgent, frightened. There's a problem in the bathroom. Someone's not responding. Passengers turned. Heads whipped around. Flight. Attendants rushed toward the rear. Sundar sat up, heart racing. Because sometimes, even in the air, life can crash without warning. Asterisk the call beyond the curtained moment the voice cried out from the back of the plane. The calm that had settled over the cabin shattered like glass. Someone's not responding in the bathroom. It wasn't just panic, it was urgency layered with fear. Not the kind that people scream with, but the kind that drops a cold weight into everyone's stomach. The kind that wraps around the cabin like invisible. Sundar was already unbuckling his seatbelt, not because he was a doctor or a hero, but because sometimes instinct is louder than reason. And instinct told him that every second mattered. The flight attendants rushed toward the back. One had a small emergency kit in hand. Another held a radio to his mouth, speaking fast but calm. The curtain separating the economy cabin from the back galley was pulled aside with a quick swipe. Sundar followed, moving past staring faces, brushing shoulders, hearing the low murmur of questions building like a wave behind him. He stopped just short of the galley, where a small crowd had formed. Flight attendants were crouched near the lavatory door, which was now slightly opened. A man was slumped inside. His head leaned against the side wall of the tiny bathroom, motionless. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and his skin had turned a pale shade that didn't belong at 30,000 feet. He was wearing a dark blazer and jeans, and his eyes were half open, unfocused. Is there a doctor on board? One of the crew shouted, loud enough to echo down the narrow aisle. People looked around. A man halfway up the cabin raised a hand. I'm an empt. He called and stood quickly, moving toward the scene. The flight attendant nodded and stepped aside, but Sundar didn't move away. He stood back, out of the way, but his eyes never left the man on the floor. Something about him was familiar. Not his face. His face was hard to see clearly, but something else. The way he was dressed, the way his bag sat beside the sink, the way a business card had fallen from his pocket and now lay near the drain. He bent slightly, picking it up. Mitchell Garvey, VP of Communications, Global Ethics Alliance. Sundar's breath caught for a second. He recognized the name. Mitchell was one of the panelists scheduled to speak after him in Washington. He was part of the new initiative to bring transparency and accountability into global tech partnerships. Sundar had read some of his work. They'd never met in person. Until now. And now. Mitchell was unconscious on the cold floor of an airplane bathroom. Somewhere over the Atlantic. The M knelt beside him, checking his pulse, his pupils, his breathing. "He's stable but barely conscious," he said. "Might be a diabetic issue, or maybe a seizure. Hard to tell. But we need to keep him flat and hydrated." The flight attendant was already calling the cockpit. Moments later, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a medical emergency on board. We are contacting ground medical assistance now and maybe diverting course to the nearest airport." Gasps, soft murmurs. People checking their watches, whispering about delays. But Sundar's mind was far from schedules. He watched the crew gently lift Mitchell from the cramped bathroom and lay him down on a row of empty seats near the rear. The man groaned softly, still out of it. His chest rising and falling too quickly. Sundar stepped closer to the head attendant. "Do you need help contacting his emergency contact? I can try to unlock his phone. It might have facial recognition." The attendant hesitated. "Are you family?" "No," Sundar said quietly. "But he's supposed to be speaking with me tomorrow. I know who he is." The attendant gave a slow nod. "Try. Just don't change anything on the phone." Sundar picked up Mitchell's phone and gently aimed it toward the man's face. It unlocked. The background image showed two young girls standing at a school recital stage, both with bright pink bows and wide eyes. He scrolled carefully to the emergency contact list. A name appeared. Melanie, wife. He tapped the number and held the phone. To his ear, it rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a tired voice answered. "Hello, Melanie?" Sundar asked gently. "My name is Sundar. I'm on a flight with your husband, Mitchell. There's been a medical emergency. He's okay for now, but we're making an emergency landing so he can get care." Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "What? Oh my God. Did he what happened?" "He collapsed in the lavatory," Sundar explained softly. "We're not sure why, but he's stable. A paramedic on board is helping him. I thought you should know." He heard a soft sob on the other end. Then a small, broken voice. "Please. Tell him to hold on. Our daughters need him." "I need him. I will," Sundar said. "And I'll stay with him until help arrives." When he ended the call, he sat down beside Mitchell's temporary bed of airplane seats. His heart was still pounding, not with fear, but with something else. Something deeper. Something that reminded him that even in a world full of division and misunderstanding, there were moments when strangers could become guardians. Even just for a few minutes. He looked at the man, unconscious and pale, and wondered what battles he had fought to be in the position he was in. What doors he had pushed open. What prejudice he might have faced, or caused, or changed. And then Sundar heard a voice behind him. "You didn't have to do all that." He turned. It was the woman from seat 14B. Her arms were crossed, but her face had softened. Something had shifted. Her eyes no longer held suspicion, but something like shame. Or perhaps reflection. "You could have just sat back and let someone else handle it," she said. "I could have," Sundar replied, "but you didn't." "Because that's not who I want to be." She nodded slowly. And then, in a voice so quiet it could have been missed, she whispered, "Maybe I need to start asking myself the same question. Sundar didn't reply. He didn't need to. They sat there for a moment in the hum of the cabin. The baby a few rows ahead was crying. The engine roared softly beneath the floor. And somewhere out the window, the ocean stretched below, endless and unknowable, just like people. Moments later, the intercom dinged again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are preparing to descend toward our emergency landing location. Please remain calm and seated. The cabin lights dimmed further. Seatbelts clicked, heads turned. Fear mixed with concern. And in the midst of it, Sundar stayed beside a man he barely knew, because sometimes that's what humanity looks like. Not grand gestures, not applause, but the quiet decision to stay. When it's inconvenient. As the plane began its slow descent, Sundar looked toward the front of the aircraft, where his own bag sat, untouched. Inside that bag was the speech he was supposed to deliver. The one about the future of ethics and technology, but maybe without realizing it, the real speech had already begun right here, 30,000 feet in the air, written in acts of courage and compassion instead of words. And somewhere deep inside, Sundar knew. The hardest part hadn't happened yet. Asterisk to the ground beneath the clouds, the plane touched down with slow, uneasy grace. The wheels hit the tarmac and gave a short, jarring bounce before settling into the heavy drag of brakes. Outside the windows, the world was dark and unfamiliar. The runway lights blinked through a soft rain that blurred the glass like smudged memories. This wasn't Washington. This was a small emergency airstrip somewhere near Newfoundland. Not planned, not scheduled, but necessary. Inside the cabin, passengers remained quiet. No one complained anymore about the delay. Something deeper had settled over them, all a quiet respect. Or maybe the slow realization that their own comfort wasn't the center of this moment. Sundar stayed by Mitchell's side. The man was breathing better now, though his eyes still fluttered with confusion, as if he were trapped in the space between sleep and waking. Asterisk. A flight attendant knelt beside Sundar. Paramedics are waiting at the gate, she said softly. They'll board as soon as we stop. Sundar nodded, gently placing Mitchell's phone back beside him. He had already sent a message to Melanie to let her know they had landed. Her reply had come quickly. I don't know who you are, but thank you. Please don't leave him alone. The truth was, Sundar didn't plan to. When the plane finally rolled to a full stop, the crew opened the forward door, and the cold air rushed in. It carried the smell of rain and fuel and something else. Urgency. 2. Paramedics boarded fast, wheeling a stretcher down the narrow aisle. They moved like they'd done this 100 times before. Their hands were steady, their voices calm. They checked vitals, lifted Mitchell gently, and began the process of moving him off the plane. As they rolled him past, Sundar stood up to walk beside them. Mitchell stirred, opening his eyes just enough to see Sundar's face. Who are you? He asked in a broken whisper. A friend, Sundar said quietly. For now, just a friend? Mitchell nodded, then slipped back into sleep. As they reached the front of the plane, a voice called from behind. It was the woman from 14B. She stood in the aisle, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met Sundar's, and she said just 2 words. I'm sorry. The cabin fell silent. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She just stood there, open and vulnerable. The very woman who had tried to have him removed from the flight was now apologizing in front of strangers. No pride. No defense. Just truth. Sundar didn't smile. He didn't need to. Instead, he offered her a gentle nod. And with that, he stepped off the plane. The terminal was small, almost too quiet. Cold tiles, old signs. This wasn't a place where planes like his usually landed. The medics rolled Mitchell down a short hallway where an ambulance waited in the rain. Sundar stood under the awning and watched them load the stretcher. A voice beside him spoke. He didn't have to stay. He turned. It was one of the crew members. Liam, the same attendant from earlier. Most people would have walked away, Liam continued. But you sat there with him for hours? Who are you? Really? Sundar didn't answer right away. He looked out into the wet dark. watching the ambulance lights spin quietly. Someone who believes that who we are matters more when no one's watching. He said at last. Liam nodded, but his eyes showed a hint of confusion. But aren't you that guy? The Google guy? Sundar gave a small, almost tired smile. Some days, yes. Other days, just someone trying to do the right thing. He turned to go, ready to return to the plane. But before he could, another voice called from behind. "Excuse me, sir." A woman in uniform rushed up to him. She held a clipboard and a radio. Her badge read Airport Operations. "Were you the one who called the emergency contact?" She asked. "Yes." "And you stayed with the passenger the whole time?" "I did." She glanced at her radio, then back at Sundar. "The local news wants to speak to someone. The story's already getting out. A passenger said they saw the CEO of Google helping someone in the back of the plane. Is that true?" Sundar sighed softly. "I didn't do it for a headline." "I understand," she said. "But it's out now. A few people filmed parts of it. Social media is already spinning." He looked past her. Toward the plane. What had started as a moment between two people was now something else. Something louder. He thought of the speech he was supposed to give the next day. He thought of the carefully prepared slides, the notes, the rehearsals, but he also thought of Mitchell's wife alone at home, clutching her phone. He thought of the children in the background of Mitchell's lock screen. He thought of the woman from 14B, now forced to look at herself in a new light. Maybe this was the speech now. Not in a ballroom, not on a stage. But here. In the rain. A few minutes later, he was back on the plane. The crew had offered him a different seat near the front, but he declined. He returned to 14C. The seat beside him, 14B, was still empty. But not for long. A few moments later, the woman returned. She didn't say a word, just sat down, folded her hands, and stared ahead. After a while, she spoke without turning. "I Googled you." He chuckled softly. "That happens sometimes. I didn't know who you were. I just thought..." Her voice trailed off. "I know," Sundar said gently. She hesitated. "Then you must hate people like me." He turned toward her, expression calm. "I don't have time for hate. Too much to build." The plane began to move again, wheels rumbling as it taxied back toward the runway. This time, no one looked at Sundar with suspicion. No one whispered about danger. Now they whispered about something else. "Did you see what he did? That was the Google guy." He stayed the whole time. Outside, the rain had softened. The sky was still dark, but the clouds were lighter. There was space between them now. Space for the dawn. As the plane lifted once again into the air, Sundar leaned back and closed his eyes. Not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. Not everything was healed, but something had changed. And he could feel it beginning. When kindness goes viral. It started with a grainy video clip posted by a teenager in row 21. Just a few seconds. Blurry footage of Sundar Pichai kneeling next to an unconscious man while the flight crew scrambled around him. The boy hadn't meant anything big by it. He had just thought it was cool that someone from tech world was doing something human. He posted it with a simple caption: "Guy from Google helping during a medical emergency on our flight." Didn't expect that. And then the internet did what the internet does. It spat. By the time the plane landed again. This time in Washington, finally reaching its intended destination, the video had already hit 1 million views. And it wasn't just about the medical emergency. Someone else, sitting just a few rows up, had posted another clip, a softer one. A recording of the moment the woman in seat 14 billion apologized to Sundar. The way she said, "I'm sorry." The way he simply nodded. People didn't just watch the clip. They felt it. They shared it. They dissected it. And suddenly, the man who had tried to stay invisible on a plane was now on every screen. Reporters waited near the terminal when Sundar stepped off. They didn't shout. They didn't push. But their cameras were ready. Their eyes were wide. Their questions hovered like static in the air. Bo quotes Mr. Pichai. "Can you comment on what happened during the flight? What was going through your mind when the passenger collapsed? Do you forgive the woman who asked for you to be removed?" He didn't answer at first. He simply kept walking, bag over his shoulder, steps quiet on the polished airport floor. Part of him wanted to vanish into the crowd. Part of him wanted to board another plane and disappear for a while. Not because he regretted helping. Never that. But because the world had taken a private moment and turned it into a stage. But that's not what he did. Instead, he stopped near a coffee kiosk, turned slowly to the reporters, and raised his hand just slightly. The crowd hushed. And Sundar spoke. "I don't have a prepared statement," he said. "What happened on that plane wasn't about me. It was about how we treat each other when we think no one will remember. I didn't help Mitchell because he's important. I helped because he's human. And I didn't stay quiet when someone assumed the worst of me, not because I was offended, but because staying silent helps that kind of thinking survive." The cameras clicked, flashes popped, but his voice didn't rise. He wasn't performing. He was just being honest. "The truth is," he continued, "I have been in rooms where people praised me for my work and then questioned if I really belonged a few minutes later. I have been underestimated in boardrooms. I've been watched in airports. I've been both the CEO of one of the world's largest companies and the man mistaken for the help." He paused, letting the weight of that truth land. But if one act of kindness, one moment of patience can make someone reconsider their assumptions, then maybe that's the real job, not just leading a company, but leading with character. The room fell quiet. When he finished, he turned and walked away. He didn't wait for applause, because this wasn't a speech. It was something else. Something more sacred. By the time he reached his hotel, the story was on every major network. News. Anchors debated whether it was a moment of progress or a symptom of how far things still had to go. Talk shows played the clips over and over, adding slow music and dramatic captions. But something more surprising happened. People began to respond, not just with likes and shares, but with stories of their own. A teacher from Ohio posted about the time she had mistaken a student's father for a janitor, only to find out he was a surgeon. A woman in London shared how she once avoided sitting next to a man in traditional clothing on a train, only for him to later save her from choking on a piece of food. A teenager in Malaysia posted a video thanking Sundar, saying, "I've always been scared to speak English in public because of my accent. Now I feel like maybe it doesn't matter as much." The comments flooded in. Not all of them were kind. Some mocked. Some doubted. But most were raw, honest people confronting the little pieces of prejudice they had buried and forgotten. And through it all, Sundar stayed quiet until he received a message he hadn't expected. It came from Melanie Mitchell's wife. "He's awake, stable. The doctors say your quick action made a difference. He wants to thank you in person." Sundar didn't reply right away. He sat in the hotel room, lights low, the city buzzing outside the window. He could see the Capitol from his seat, the white dome of government, the soft glow of monuments. But his thoughts were far away from that plane, from the hospital, from his own childhood. He remembered sitting on a cement bench outside his school in Chennai, watching older students get into cars and buses while he waited, hungry, for his father's bicycle to appear. He had once believed that success meant leaving those moments behind. But now he knew the truth. Those moments were never meant to be erased. They were meant to be carried, so that when the world asked him who he really was, he wouldn't have to guess. He'd know. He was the boy on the bench. He was the man in 14. He was both. And that was enough. Just then, another message appeared on his phone. This one was anonymous. No name, no subject, just a single line. "I was the woman sitting next to you. I don't know how to say this, but thank you for changing me without shaming me." He read it twice, then once more. And for the first time in days, he let the tears come, not from pain. But from the deep, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, one small act could bend something broken back toward the light. Asterisk, the speech that never happened at the hospital room was quiet. The way only recovery rooms can be filled with the hum of machines, the soft shuffle of nurses in the hallway, and the faint beep of a heart monitor that seemed to beat just a little faster as Sundar stepped inside. Mitchell lay in the bed, propped up by pillows, his skin still pale but his eyes clearer now. He looked smaller than before, not physically, but somehow stripped of the confidence and presence he had on paper. Beside him sat Melanie, her hand wrapped gently around his, eyes red from sleeplessness. When she saw Sundar, she stood up immediately. "You came," she whispered. "Of course," Sundar said. Mitchell tried to sit up straighter, but winced. "You don't have to move," Sundar added quickly. "You're here, that's enough." Mitchell gave a weak chuckle. "Funny, I thought I'd be making a speech in DC today. Instead, I woke up in a hospital bed and found out the internet knows more about me than my own board." Sundar smiled. "I think you made a bigger impact without ever opening your mouth." There was a pause. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Then Mitchell spoke again. "I don't remember everything," he said. "But I remember your face. I remember your voice. And I remember feeling safe." That's all that mattered in that moment, Sundar said quietly. Melanie stepped away to give them space. Mitchell, single quotes. Eyes searched Sundar's face. "I also heard what happened before that. With the woman. I saw the video. I saw you handled it. And I don't know how you keep doing it." "Doing what?" Sundar asked, being calm, being kind. "When the world keep poking at you." Sundar looked down for a moment, then back up, "Because I remember what it felt like to be overlooked. And because I know what it feels like when someone finally sees." You didn't owe me anything," Mitchell said. "I wasn't helping a vice president of anything," Sundar replied. "I was helping a man who needed someone." For a long moment, there was no sound but the steady beeping of the monitor. "I've spent years working on ethics policies," Mitchell said slowly. "Writing frameworks, designing trainings. But what you did, it wasn't policy, it was personal. And it made everything else feel small." Sundar stepped closer. "Maybe we've been thinking about it wrong," he said. "Maybe it's not about writing perfect systems. Maybe it starts with teaching people how to treat each other before they ever sit at the table." Mitchell nodded slowly, eyes filled with something unspoken. Not guilt, not shame, but something closer to clarity. As Sundar turned to leave, Melanie stopped him. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just for helping him, but for seeing the best in him, even when he wasn't able to give it." Sundar simply nodded. He walked out into the hospital hallway, the weight of the world somehow lighter than before. By the time he reached the auditorium in Washington, the lights were already dimming. His team had prepared everything, the stage, the slides, the introductions. They were ready for the keynote address, but Sundar wasn't. He stood backstage looking out at the audience. Hundreds of people waiting to hear about the future of artificial intelligence, of ethics, of global responsibility. But he had already said what he needed to say. Not with data, not with bullet points. With actions. He turned to his assistant. "Cancel the speech," he said softly. She blinked. "Sir? Cancel it," he repeated. "Let them hear from someone else. Today, my place isn't on that stage." And then he walked away. Outside, the air was crisp. The city buzzed with its usual noise. But Sundar moved through it like a man who had found something quieter than applause. He took a cab to a small bookstore a few blocks away, one he used to visit during his early years in the U.S. when he had been just another student, trying to find warmth in the smell of old pages and the kindness of strangers. He walked inside. The bell over the door chimed softly. An old man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Haven't seen you in years," the man said. "I was overdue." Sundar replied. He wandered through the aisles, letting his fingers brush against spines worn soft by time. He picked up a book of poems, opened it, read a single line. What you do when no one sees becomes who you are when they finally do. He closed the book gently. When he left the shop, the sun had started to set. Golden light spilled across the sidewalk like a quiet promise. People passed, him on either side, rushing, talking, Living dot, none of them stopped him. Dot, none of them knew what had happened on that plane. And he was perfectly okay with that. Dot, he sat on a bench nearby. No cameras, no audience, no spotlight. Dot, just a man. Dot, just Sundar. Dot. And in that silence, in that stillness, he realized something. The world didn't need louder speeches. Dot, it needed softer revolutions. And that was how they would begin, not in boardrooms, not with press releases, but with one person choosing grace over judgment, again and again, until the noise faded and all that remained was truth. He looked up at the sky. Dot, same sky as the one over Chennai, same sky as the one over the Atlantic, same sky as the one that watched him become more than anyone ever expected. He smiled to himself, and then, as the wind moved gently through the trees, Sundar whispered the final words of the speech that never happened. If you want to change the world, start by changing how you see the person sitting next to you. And then he closed his eyes and let the world catch up. Asterisk.